Women's Health West would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting today. This land always was and always will be Aboriginal land. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to all community members listening today. So hello and welcome everyone listening today. My name is Sarah and I use the pronouns she and her, and I work as a sexual and reproductive health coordinator at Women's Health West.
Hi everyone, my name is Susan. I also use the pronouns she and her, and I work with Sarah at Women's Health West, where I'm the team leader for sexual and reproductive health. Welcome everyone, it's great to be here.
Thanks Susan. So the two of us are here today. It's our second recording in our 4-part series for Melton Lifelong Learning Festival, and each of these 4 recordings is informed by questions that parents sent in about their children's sexuality development. So our previous recording discussed why it is important that parents engage with their children about sexuality, and today we're going to explore how and what should be discussed. And joining us today is Tess, a health promotion coordinator at Women's Health West, who's going to be sharing her perspective on today's topic. So welcome, Tess. I think we might start if you could just tell us a little bit about your work at Women's Health West and also why you think this is an important topic to talk about.
Hello, thanks for having me. My name is Tess and my pronouns are she and her. I work in Preventing Violence Together team with Women's Health West, but I've done lots of facilitation with groups of women with disabilities at Women's Health West as well. In that time, working with communities with people with disabilities, I think it's important because that has been a really taboo topic, and it's been really hard for parents with people with disabilities to kind of see their children as sexual beings. It's always treated as something that's really embarrassing or shameful or inappropriate. So I just think that attitudes like this can come from a place of wanting to protect children, but the risk is that sex becomes something that's troubling or shameful or even dangerous. So I guess it's just important to kind of recognise that everyone has the right to understand that sexuality is a part of life and to know about consent and feel supported to explore this safely.
Thank you, Tess, and thanks for joining us today. Sarah, before we explore what parents should talk to their young people about and young people in their lives about, what are some of the things that they should think about or know about sexuality before having these conversations?
Yeah, I think that's a really good place to start, Susan, because I know that sexuality isn't something that most people are comfortable or confident talking about. And a lot of the time it's actually easier to just avoid that conversation altogether. But it's really important that all of us can have conversations about our sexuality and the impact that it has in our lives, but especially young children and young people. And children receive messages really early on without even having direct conversations. So if we're avoidant of talking about sex, or if we treat it as something that's taboo or something to be secretive or ashamed about, then we actually reinforce the message that it's something that we should avoid and that children should try and hide from parents and adults. It might be helpful to think for parents to know that when children are asking questions about sexuality, it's not actually for sexual reasons. They're going to be curious about how their bodies are working and how they're feeling, and are just coming to you because they're curious about themselves and want to get a better understanding of who they are and how to interact with other people. And so I think it's really important that we try to normalize sexuality. It's something that all of us experience from the day that we're born, and it's going to continually impact us in a really significant way for the rest of our lives. And we can start working towards normalizing this conversation, especially with our children, by having open and comfortable conversations on a regular basis. Now, I've had a lot of parents share that they're not sure where to start with conversations about sex. They don't know how much information to share, when to share it, or how to respond to their children. But I guess the thing is to just sort of to push through that and just try to have short, regular conversations with your child, because children are looking to their parents for information. And that doesn't mean that parents need to have all of the answers. It's totally fine for you and your child to have conversations which feel silly and they feel awkward, and it's absolutely fine if you want to laugh and admit that it's embarrassing or unusual for you to have conversations with your child. The important thing is that children and young people know that they have a safe space for them where they can ask questions and that they feel comfortable going to you as a trusted adult. And if you don't know the answer to something, don't stress about this. You can actually use it as an opportunity to look something up together and to make sure that your child is getting information from a reliable source. And the good news is that there's actually lots of really great contemporary resources online and books and resources that different community health organisations have put together that you can read together.
Thanks, Sarah. So, Tess, do you have any suggestions about how parents might initiate these conversations with the young people in their lives, particularly those who might not be used to having these kinds of discussions around sexuality?
Yeah, it's always a really tricky conversation to have as a parent, I think, but probably approaching it as kind of like avoiding one big birds and bees type talk. It'll just be more comfortable for everyone if you're kind of more meaningfully engaging in kind of regular and short conversations. So, you know, you can kind of make comments and ask questions about normal day-to-day activities. So like when you're watching TV or when you're with family and friends, or maybe it's like shopping or something like that. You can kind of discuss topics about bodies and health and relationships and gender. You know, other parents have sort of said that it's helpful to have something to do while you're talking. So like watching a movie or while you're driving or cooking or gardening, something like that. Both, you know, children and parents feel more comfortable as like, you know, when they can focus their attention on other things at the same time and like use their hands or something. It just helps to make people sort of feel less embarrassed or like witnessed or something. I know that my mum always used to engage me in conversations that were more tricky in the car. So I feel like looking back, that always helped me. I think that always worked. I think also just making sure that the responses that you have are just really short and simple responses to questions. So clarify what they want to know before you provide lots of information. Children won't always view things in a sexualized way, and often they're not viewing things in a way that an adult would. So they don't need all the answers. It's just important to answer what they want to know honestly. And I guess it's different for children at different ages. So you'll be able to kind of monitor that. And I think we'll probably get to talking about age a bit later in the podcast probably.
Thanks, Tess. So on the other hand, is there anything you would advise parents to avoid doing or saying when they're having these conversations with the young people in their life?
No, I think it's probably just important for parents to reflect on their understanding of their sexuality and sexuality generally. So, you know, what attitudes and beliefs do you have towards sexuality, and how do you think that might impact the way that you talk about sex or relationships and sexuality with your child? You know, it's more than okay to share your values and beliefs and attitudes. But I think you discussed it in the first recording that children and young people should be allowed opportunities to safely question what they understand and make their own informed decisions about sexuality. We just want to avoid making children feel ashamed for being curious, and that while they kind of explore their sexuality, you know, it might be questions about gender or sexual orientation or their bodies. Or, you know, maybe it's about when mishaps happen, like it might be period stains or having a wet dream or having an erection or masturbating or whatever. I guess at the root, this is like about treating others well and thinking about how you're treating others, you know, at the same time understanding that you have the right to expect to be treated well and safe. And that's not contrary to any religious cultural views that I'm aware of.
All right. Thanks, Tess. Well, I think we might move on to what to talk to children about when it comes to sexuality. And I know that there's so much that could be said in response to this, but for the purpose of this recording, I was thinking we could just address some of the key concerns that were raised by parents in Melton. So in this next section, we're just going to chat about some of the questions that were asked by Melton parents in a survey that was sent out. And the very first topic that we're going to talk about is respecting other genders. So we had questions about how to address sexism in the playground, as well as how to explain to children and young people the importance of respect for other genders. Susan, I thought you could share some thoughts on this.
Thanks, Sarah. I'd love to. I think To answer this question, it's probably important to start with explaining what we generally mean when we say gender. I think we talk about gender and the complexity of gender more these days than perhaps we used to, which is, I think, a great thing, but I think it's important that people understand what it is we're actually talking about. So a lot of people tend to use the words gender and sex interchangeably, but we're actually talking about different things here. So traditionally, the word sex refers to bodies and to biology. So we're talking about the physical parts of us, so, you know, our chromosomes, our hormones, but also like our genitals, so penises, vulvas, breasts, uterus, those physical parts of our bodies. So that's generally what we mean when we're saying sex. However, when we talk about gender, or when we talk about gender stereotypes, we're actually describing the lessons that we're taught about how we should look or behave because of our sex. It's important, I think, to understand that for the most part, these gender norms or stereotypes have very little to do with our bodies or with nature. They're actually informed by our culture. So the word that you'll sometimes hear around gender is the word construct or social construct. And what that really means is that gender stereotypes are built or constructed by the culture and the society that we live in. And as I said, don't necessarily have anything to do with our nature or our bodies. So, for example, there's no reason in nature for women to shave their legs. Nature doesn't care about that, but that's something we as a culture have created or made up as an important social grooming habit for women. The same goes really for associating particular clothes or colours or hairstyles even with boys and girls. Again, nature doesn't care about clothes and hair, but that's something that we have decided as a culture is important. So basically, gender stereotypes are really the cultural or social idea that boys and girls or women and men should act in certain ways, should look certain ways, should dress certain ways, and are suited to different kinds of activities. So the question around young people expressing sexism or, I guess, using these stereotypes in their day-to-day lives is a really interesting one, and it's one that troubles a lot of parents, I think. If your kid is saying something like boys shouldn't do this or girls can't do that, they're actually not doing something that's sexist purposefully, or they're not doing something bad. What they're actually doing is learning. They're learning those stereotypes, and they're learning them from everywhere, and it's reinforced throughout their lives. So even you as a parent might try very hard to not limit your child by stereotypes, but these are such dominant parts of our culture that it's really, really hard for those ideas not to permeate into young people. The problem really is that we're not just talking about difference here. What tends to happen with these stereotypes is in the society we live in, unfortunately, the stereotypes, the behaviours, the roles that are associated with men are generally held as more valuable and important. So what this tends to do is create an inequality between girls and boys and women and men that can follow them through their lives. So it is important to address those statements and those ideas in young people, and because what they're learning is that there are limits on who they can be, how they can express themselves, and how they can behave, and the roles they can take up in their community and in their family. So it is important, if we want to create a more gender equal society, that we do address them. And you can do that really simply just by asking questions. If your child is saying things that you think are sexist, you can ask them why. You can ask them, why, what makes you think that? So if they say, you know, girls shouldn't play this game, or girls are like this, or they should behave like this, ask them why. Where are they getting that idea? And if you can explore that with them, what you can generally arrive at is there actually is no really sound reason for them to think that. And in very many ways, it's something parents will be learning alongside their kids, because we all have a lot of this baggage. And day to day, I think we're all trying to unlearn the limits that were imposed on us due to our gender as young people. So I would ask parents to take it easy on themselves and be kind to themselves around this as well. It's big work, and it is It's something that is a big part of all of our lives, but it is really important that we have those conversations and explore those misperceptions with the young people that we have influence over.
Amazing. Thanks, Susan. I think you've made some really important points there and highlighted a lot of considerations that I think a lot of us, not just parents, sort of take for granted and don't really question when it comes to gender. And I think it's really important for parents to think about these things, especially when we're sort of looking to be supportive people in our children's lives, and to just make them feel supported if they're feeling like they don't fit this sort of box of girl or a boy. And just as they're exploring their gender and whether or not they will grow up to identify as a man or a woman or will be trans or non-binary, it's just really important that our starting conversations that we have with young people are going to be positive and will help set them up for having more confidence and to feel more comfortable exploring that as they grow up. All right, well, on to the next topic. We had a few questions from parents asking how to approach the conversation of bodies and the things that are changing with their children's bodies during puberty. So we had quite a few of these questions, and we've actually made our next recording all about this topic and how to support your children through puberty. So we will keep this response short, but Tess, I thought you might be able to just share a couple of thoughts or considerations about how parents might be able to approach this conversation.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think you both made such great points in that last question that can kind of carry over into this as well. It's just one of those massive times of change and growth in our lives. So it's just so important that caring adults can explain those changes of puberty to their children before and while they're going through them, and just to assure them that the changes that are happening are normal. So, for example, I think we received a question that was from a concerned parent that was worried about their child who was touching their penis. And, you know, kids just explore naturally, but parents can kind of guide kids to know what's appropriate when and where. And I guess like the best response should just reassure their child that it's normal and healthy and something, you know, that can be done in private rather than something that they shouldn't do at all. So listening to what your child has questions about and being mindful of how they're feeling about the changes that are happening to their body is just so important. Sarah, I think you mentioned in the next recording we'll explore that in kind of greater detail about how to support your child during puberty and how to have conversations about those physical and emotional changes, you know, which will include periods and masturbation and gender expression and relationships.
Thank you, Tess. Sarah, another question we were asked or are asked quite commonly is how to respond to children and young people when they ask us where babies come from. So obviously this response will be different for everyone depending on the age of your child and also how much information they want to know or what they're actually asking you. So what do you think is the best way for parents to respond to these questions? Is it one big talk or is it a few simple short conversations? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think like we've sort of said about all the other conversations around sexuality, that rather than having the one big birds and the bees talk where we just sort of sit children down and have a talk to them about sex, that it's definitely going to be more helpful to have short and simple and regular conversations and to let children know that they have an opportunity to like keep going back and forth with you, to have conversations and to get answers to questions. And when it comes to knowing where babies come from, all children at some point are going to be curious about where babies come from. And there isn't really a right or wrong way or an exact response that should be given to this question. It's going to be different for every child and will be dependent on the relationship that you have with your child. I guess it's just important to know and to keep in mind that when answering, to try and be calm and open. Children aren't going to know that this stuff might be awkward for adults to talk about. So they might just be coming to you with like a very just simply curious question. So I find what is helpful is to ask children exactly what they want to know and to try and keep responses as simple as possible. And I think it also helps once you sort of respond with that short, simple answer to ask them afterwards if that answers their question. We might want to just sort of give a lot of information, or we might just sort of unknowingly ramble a little bit while we're talking, and this might confuse or overwhelm them a little. So just try to respond to what they want to know. And, you know, it seems a little bit silly, but just simply sort of taking a breath and a pause and sort of collecting your thoughts before you answer a question will actually be really helpful. All right, so though I can't give specific answers to this question, I would say that before the age of 8, you could simply say that a baby grows in a parent's belly and comes out of the vagina. And if your child asks how it gets there, you could say that most women have eggs and that most men have sperm, and that when these meet, they can grow into a baby. And then as your child gets a bit older, maybe between the ages of 10 and 12, you could start giving a little bit more detail about sex and how that happens. But remember to keep using simple language. So you could simply explain that pregnancy happens when a penis enters a vagina and leaves sperm for the egg to meet. At this older age, I think it's important to also share that sex happens not just to make babies, but also for pleasure and connection. And I would also suggest sharing that there are different ways to have babies. So explaining that adoption happens and IVF. And if you want to be talking about things, to use simple language. So for IVF, saying something like, sometimes families need help putting a sperm and egg together to make a baby. And I also think it would be a good idea to share that there's different family dynamics, just so your child understands maybe if they're interacting with your family or family friends or the parents of kids that they go to school with, that there's different family dynamics. So you could have a single mum or 2 mums or 2 dads, and just let them know that that's a completely normal way for families to look as well. But yeah, I guess I would just say share what you think your child will understand. At that age, you know your child the best. So just sort of having a conversation with them that you think will work best, and keeping in mind that it's not a one-off conversation. So you can have regular chats about this throughout your child's development. And what I know is really helpful is that using websites and books and pictures is a really helpful tool when you're having conversations about this.
So, Sarah, though, I think we still have a bit more to say here about talking to young people and children about sex and sexuality. So I wonder if you have any more advice about that for parents listening to this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where a lot of confusion comes from, is that people are sort of thinking that any kind of sex education or conversations with children about sex is about sexual intercourse. But having conversations about sexuality is what's important, and sexuality encompasses so much more than just sex. And I think having conversations as early as possible with children about sexuality is going to be really helpful. And these conversations won't be sexual. It's about children's development, and they'll want to know information because they'll be curious. And it's just simply conversations about body parts and encouraging children to share their thoughts and concerns with you. Because we want to start, I guess, a habit of just making it very normal for your children to ask questions and to think about their bodies and to turn to you as the trusted adult to ask questions. So if we get into the practice of having lots of comfortable conversations early on with our children, these are going to develop naturally if you've established a positive and open, supportive relationship early on. And as your child gets older, they're going to come to you with questions and concerns. And you can also reach out to them and prepare them for changes such as puberty or entering into relationships before they happen. In the early conversations with children, I would say that they should be learning about their bodies, knowing how they work, and knowing that they are their own. It's important for your child to learn the correct terms for anatomy and to know that no parts of their bodies are something to be ashamed of. We want children to start feeling comfortable talking about their bodies and to have the language to ask for health information if they need to. We want them to be able to share what's happening with their bodies and how they are feeling from an early age. So it's fine if your family refers to genitals or different anatomy with fun names or different names that you prefer to use, like calling a penis or willy. But it's important that your family are also comfortable using terms such as penis, as well as vulva and vagina and testicles, just like you use ears, hands and legs. It's fine if you don't know the actual terms for all body parts. A lot of us don't, because we never grew up being used to using these terms or ever using these terms. But thankfully, there's a lot of great resources online, and there's books which parents and children will both find really useful. So by having conversations which use these terms normally, it's going to make children feel more comfortable about their different body parts. We don't want to make children and young people feel like they have secret sort of shameful parts of their bodies. Moving on, I also think that once we've had these like foundational early conversations with children, that once they start getting older, you want to be having conversations that prepare them as best as possible for changes such as puberty. So start having conversations about puberty before it happens, and this will be around age 8, because puberty tends to happen or start happening around age 9. Young people are also going to start thinking about relationships and being attracted to others. And parents can play a positive role here by making sure that their children know about the foundations of a healthy relationship, and that young people know that they have someone to turn to when they have concerns or questions. And we also want people to understand how to have safer sex, so to know about contraception and the responsibilities that come with having sex. And I know a lot of parents are concerned that if they start talking to young people and their teenagers about sex, that this will mean that they might have sex earlier. But research actually shows that the opposite occurs. So by having conversations about sex with young people, they often get to realise just how much responsibility that involves. And a lot of the time they actually just realise that they don't want to have sex yet, and they're not ready to have sex. So if they have all of the information and they've had early conversations and a lifetime, or like a childhood and adolescence of being able to know their rights and know their bodies, they can make better informed decisions about what they would like to happen to it. All right, well, we are nearing the end of this recording, but before we go, I was hoping that each of us could just close with a final statement, or if they had anything else to add. Tess, I'll shoot over to you first.
So I think probably just coming from working in the disability sector for so long, it's often on my mind, I guess, how important it is for all children, that all children feel equal in being able to feel educated and kind of able to express themselves about their sexuality, and to kind of talk about sex and kind of understand what healthy sexual relationships and relationships to sex, just more generally, like how important that is for children and young people, including people with disabilities. Sexuality is such a vital part of everybody's lives, especially and including people with disabilities. So I think just helping your child to understand their body, and particularly like consent and safety as well, that they have decision making when it comes to sex. So just, I guess encouraging kids to kind of, feel safe and good in their bodies when they're kind of learning about themselves and growing up. Parents can kind of help them to be better informed and able to live safer and just generally more satisfying lives.
So for me, it's really clear that a lot of parents are feeling a great deal of insecurity and anxiety about how to talk in a meaningful and appropriate way with their kids and with young people in their lives about these really important topics. I think the reason that parents are worried about this is because they want to do a really good job, and I think that's really commendable. And I think it's really important for parents to know that they're not having to do that alone. Many parents and adults struggle with having these conversations with young people, and for that reason there are specific guides around this topic and around how to engage children and young people in age-appropriate ways at different points in their life around relationships and around sex and around their bodies. So please explore these, get yourself ready for when these topics come up in your life, and don't feel like you have to do this alone. There are great supports for you to help you to do this well in the very way that you're hoping to be able to do it. So good luck to you.
I would just add that we know that our early experiences and understanding of sexuality have a really lasting impact on the rest of our lives. So I just want to reiterate that it's so important that we are able to provide children and young people with ongoing support and information that helps them feel confident and safe to explore and to express their sexuality. parents really do have an opportunity here to be positively involved in this part of their children's lives. But it comes down to them listening and genuinely trying to understand the thoughts and concerns and experiences of their child as they go through sexual development. Children and young people will want to be able to go to their parents for information and advice, but only if they know that they're going to be validated and that they'll feel safe and are going to be able to have conversations where they don't feel judged or shamed or feel like they'll be getting in trouble. Okay, well, thanks for listening, everyone. That's the end of this recording. Please tune in to our following 2 for discussions on puberty and how to support your child to stay safe online. Thank you.